at the MIT Sloan School of Management EMS Club Industry Pioneers seminar, and here to talk about the planning and design of an Olympic Games. Before my current position at Perkins & Will, I was a senior architect at the New York City Olympic bid, and after that worked at a firm called HOK Sport, which is now called Populous, designing stadia and helping plan Olympic events throughout the world. So I'm here to talk today a little bit about the New York bid, the London Olympics, both for 2012 and Sochi's 2014 bid. And I'll use the New York bid as sort of the framework to talk about the other bids as we go through things. So planning an Olympics is a large project. There's primarily two phases. There's the bid phase, and if you're successful, then there's the build the venues and host the Olympics. When I worked with New York, unfortunately, we were not successful as a bid candidate city, and I helped London afterwards with their Olympic planning, and then helped Sochi as a bid committee. But the things that go into an Olympic plan, both from a bid perspective and once you've been selected, are I think best compared to a political election or campaign, and then it becomes an enormous city undertaking. So it ranges from international relations, city planning, finance, media, community relations, a whole range of things that are needed. So we'll start with New York City's 2012 bid. And to put things in perspective, the bid process works with each country. Their Olympic committee can determine if their country has a city that wants to bid, and there's a selection process to determine candidate cities. So for 2012, there were 5 cities selected: London, Madrid, Paris, Moscow, and New York. And the post-domestic Olympic timeline, that is, once your own country's Olympic committee has decided whether or not they want to bid, then there's a process that you go through with the International Olympic Committee and present your city and your city's plans to them for selection. So at the time of the 2012 vote in 2005, there were, I believe, 115 IOC members. They're from all over the world, and the way you win an Olympics is you simply get a majority of those votes at one of their sessions, and the first city to get a majority is selected. If one isn't selected, then they remove the lowest bidding city, and you keep going until one is selected. So in the 2012 bid, we were thinking potentially that perhaps it was a North American turn. There really is no process to the selection. The IOC members select and are free to select whatever city that they want to. There is no trying to balance where it goes in the world, although as of late things have gone to places that games have never been held before. They'll be in South America and Rio for the first time. FIFA has gone to Russia and Qatar. So these kind of events are now all over the world, but we thought perhaps that there was a chance it would come back to North America. So some of the key elements in an Olympic plan and what we were doing in New York were the sports and venues, the environment, finance, transportation, security, and the Olympic Village was something very important. So I'm going to start here with a little video clip that we did. Each city is required to have their bid. You submit a bid book, which is 3 enormous volumes that has everything on how you'd run an Olympics, from the number of every single hotel, all the hotel rooms, the transportation, all the venues. There's a section on climate, just everything, a full report on your city. And New York came up with what was called the Olympic Plan, the Olympic X. So at the center of the city, across the United Nations, would be the Olympic Village, and that within the center of New York City, you'd have a cluster of venues. So the idea is that you have the Village, the Olympic Stadium, 10 different sports, all located in a very close proximity, 60,000 hotel rooms. And this is similar to what London was doing, what Paris was doing, Moscow, others, where you tend to put venues in clusters, make things so that it's easy for people to get there, it's easy for spectators, it's easy for the athletes, for the media. So New York had 3 main clusters: an Olympic Square in, where are we here? the Olympic Square, the Olympic Park, and riverfront that had the cluster of most of the venues. Outliers like sailing, you'll see, were in different locations, but that way, within the city itself, that you had most of the venues. We were trying to use existing facilities and renovate those and try to limit the amount of new construction, but then where there was new construction, to have things strategically placed and really to work with the city's long-term plan. So that what we did in New York, which was very successful, and things are actually getting built that were planned for the Olympics, but also planned for the city, even though we weren't selected, to have facilities that were either renovated or new ones that were needed in the city. So goals of the plan were athlete experience, transportation. There's 16,000 athletes in a summer game alone. There's 30,000 media that cover them, and hundreds of thousands of spectators all trying to get to venues and do that without crossing paths. Leave a legacy. This is something that's very important now in Olympic planning all over. London is doing that. Rio will be doing that. Sochi is doing that. Again, the venue planning was integrated to the long-term plan for New York City. And then sustainability has become something that's very important in the last couple of Olympics, and trying to not leave a footprint of where you've been. And then what we did in New York, and this is no different than what they're doing in London or other cities, is to really capture the excitement of the city. So let me see if I can load this other one up. This is one of my favorite clips here. So Sochi was the 2014 bid for the Winter Games, and I helped advise them working for Populous. And these are some inspirational images, but we designed all of the venues. This is a bid that was done from scratch. Oops, sorry, let's get this back on here. So one of the ideas that we came up with that was one of my favorite designs as an architect was to base the main stadium there on the Fabergé egg. And let's get here. So this was a rendering of the main stadium. Sochi's bid, their biggest strength was their biggest weakness. They had no facilities there. They wanted to make the Olympic bid as an element that would just revitalize Sochi. Sochi is in the southernmost part of Russia, and it's a tropical climate that also has snow. So you see palm trees and snow up in the mountains. So they were very successful. They based it a little bit. It was the first speech that Vladimir Putin had given in English in public, and he came to the final IOC vote in Guatemala, and they were able to sort of be the dark horse and were selected. So this is a rendering that shows the waterfront cluster of venues. It has the Olympic Village, the main stadium. It has what's the main press and broadcast facilities, and then the Olympic Village as well, and Olympic Park. All of this was designed from scratch, and they were selected. The Winter Games is a little bit, yeah.
I'm wondering, for a city like Sochi, which is so different from New York City or Moscow or anything like that, from a long-term perspective, what's the justification for building so much? I mean, in this case, from scratch. What do they do with this stuff after the 2 weeks of the Olympics?
Well, that's the recent several Olympic bids and Olympics that have been held are varied, but one of the IOC's issues is that they want to try to avoid leaving what they call white elephants, where you have facilities that are built just for Olympics and there's no use afterwards. So one of the interesting phenomena in city planning is that there's really never a schedule by which a city grows. But things like an Olympic Games give you a schedule that you can build infrastructure and facilities and things. So it's really something that if cities are creative and are able to do something like this, it can be something that's very helpful to really leapfrog and to move forward. Things others. Beijing, it was a whole different reason for hosting the games there. They wanted to show the world Beijing, and it was phenomenal. I was there for the games, but it was different than in Athens, where Athens really needed to develop a lot of infrastructure and things, and I think they did a fantastic job as well. But it's something that if the people that are involved with the bid and with the games are smart, like what they're doing in London, that the legacy is as important, if not more important, than what you do for the games. So other inspiration, and this is just me as an architect, the Winter Games, the idea that like the Olympic Oval, the skating center, other venues, the inspiration behind them, and to try to integrate that with the event, um, to have something that was based on the games, that the architecture, the event itself would merge with something that was interesting and started to tie in well in Sochi. So if we go back to New York, there were more venues in what was our Olympic Square, and then the tower behind the stadium, the proposed stadium, which actually moved at the end of our bid, but that's the International Broadcast Center. So you have to provide space for NBC, all the NBCs of the world that show up and broadcast the games, and they take a tremendous amount of space. So we go back to Sochi. So for Winter Games, there's facts like you have about 6,000 athletes, but you have 2,800 press, 7,000 broadcast, 2,300 staff members. It's phenomenal the number of people that are watching and reporting on the athletes. Just the 780 kilometers of cables. There's 130 countries that are broadcasting. All these other things that you would not typically expect behind the scenes. It's a whole separate world. So this is the main press center and international broadcast center that we designed for Sochi. And then again, that will become a convention center afterwards. So it was set up so that they had something that the city didn't have right now. If we go back to New York, so we had basketball at Madison Square Garden. I'll go really quickly through these. Just Central Park would have the triathlon. There are about 26 summer sports at the time of the 2012 bid. They sometimes add things. So BMX biking was added during our bid process, and baseball was removed. We have water polo in our Flushing cluster, archery, so things like that. This is the Whitewater Center. This is from the 1964 World's Fair in New York City. It's really largely unused. Our plan was to have a Whitewater Center there that could be left as a legacy, and you could slow down the water a little bit and have people come that were beginners and then crank it up for experts, but to leave something that was meaningful and usable behind. The Regatta Center for rowing and canoeing would be something that would transform a very polluted area and transform it. Obviously, we had baseball at the old Yankee Stadium. We couldn't show things that weren't built as part of the bid, but we knew that we'd be moving into a new Yankee Stadium if that happened. A new velodrome that would become something. This is one of the few new facilities that New York was proposing that would be used afterwards. There's a surprisingly a small number of 10,000 seat facilities in the city, and there was a demand for that. So this would house velodrome, track cycling, which there's only one indoor velodrome in the United States, I believe. That is, maybe there's two. There's one in Allentown and one in Los Angeles, and also have table tennis. We refurbish a regiment armory in the city for boxing, and then of course here's baseball. The Williamsburg waterfront is largely derelict, and this is part of the city's current planning and has actually been transformed since the bid process. But this was part of the plan to have a temporary aquatics facility with a pool that would be left over for the community. So we'll go through these quickly. Beach volleyball again on Williamsburg on the waterfront. The Brooklyn Arena is going forward. It's not being designed by Frank Gehry anymore, but it's an element that we were going to use in the plan for gymnastics, and then sailing in the city as well. So it was very important to try to have, and that's a thing that cities are doing nowadays, is to have, or bids, is to have all the events in the same city. A lot of times in the Atlanta Games, sailing was in Savannah, Georgia. And in Beijing, sailing was in a city, Qingdao, which is far away from Beijing. But the idea was to have everything in one city. We wanted to have it around the Statue of Liberty, but it didn't meet there's not enough consistent winds there, so we had to move it a little further out. Road cycling on Staten Island, softball at the Richmond County Ballpark there, and then the Greenbelt Equestrian Center would be for the equestrian facilities, and then mountain biking, and these are actually capped landfills. So again, that was part of the city's plan. Right now, these are becoming parks, and that was part of the plan. Up at Columbia, we would have field hockey, where they play football, and then modern pentathlon in Orchard Beach, north of the city. One of the legacies that we were hoping for would be the Pelham Bay Park, where the NYPD currently has their shooting training facility, that would transform into something that would house shooting during the Olympics and be left over as a legacy for the NYPD afterwards. And then in Nassau County, the Nassau Coliseum would have handball, and in New Jersey there would be soccer. So you can see that the Olympic X, really, that all the events and venues were on this X. Originally, it was planned that the athletes would arrive on ferry in the north-south, and on the east-west would be a dedicated rail line. And it was something that the IOC preferred to have the same system they have, which is everybody's on a bus and it leaves from the village. And it was something that may be a little ahead of its time, but the idea was to try to limit the footprint again. So we'll quickly go through. Another part of the Olympics now is part of planning the Paralympics as well. And that happens 6 weeks after, a few weeks after the Olympic Games, in some of the same facilities and in new facilities. Randall's Island was going to be the place that we had an Olympic training center and a large amount of the Paralympic planning. So again, the plan was to have all the venues near public transport so all the spectators could arrive without having to drive. The use of existing facilities, to have as many of these facilities in the city or as close as possible to the center of things. And then the Olympic Village, and the idea was to be across from the United Nations in Queens. We had a special international competition that we posted. We had submissions from all over the world, and we spent 14 weeks working with 5 firms that were selected, one out of Copenhagen, one in Los Angeles, one from Rotterdam, one in New York City, and then Zaha Hadid in London. And so they had a range of designs that we worked with them, and there was a very large process and then a final selection for a firm to design that. So this was one of the more eccentric ones. This was something that was very exciting. It generated a lot of excitement during the process. My focus, obviously, and clearly in the presentation, was on the design and planning, but community relations, the marketing, international relations are all important and critical elements in the bid. It's really similar to a political campaign or election. And this was something that helped generate excitement in the world, and people were following what was New York City going to do for this village. It's getting built now. It's not being built by the same architects, but that, again, was part of the city's plan, and it was in an area where the city is building now housing for the future. So in Sochi, we did the same thing. We were planning their Olympic Village. And then part of the things of being a planner and designer on the team, if you look really closely, you can see somebody very familiar in the background, but sort of included myself in a couple images. Some friends, the guys that actually did the renderings are here, and this is a colleague of mine that spoke at your EMS conference last year. So again, the Olympic Village is something that is a pretty phenomenal thing, where if you start listing the amount of toilet paper and the amount of food that's used and meals that's served, it's phenomenal. But in a Winter Games, you have 4,500, 6,000 athletes and officials. You're serving 11,000 meals a day, and there's 5,000 people just working at this facility. And the Summer Games, it's just even exponentially higher with 16,000 athletes. So if we go back to New York, again, the key elements of the bid are to make it exciting. You want this to be something that the athletes are excited about, that you're able to afford it, and cost or something that's closely managed, that's easy to get around for all the different groups. One of the things that's talked about is the spectators, the officials, the IOC members, the athletes. Everybody wants to go to where they need to go on time, efficiently, and they're not supposed to cross paths. You don't want athletes going to a facility at the same time or through the same path that the officials or others are going to. So there's a lot of logistical coordination. And then again, a theater for sport for the city that you're in. When we were helping London, they have volleyball at the Horse Guard Parade, where it's the juxtaposition of beach volleyball and a landmark is something that makes people excited about the city that you're in. And then the post-Olympic legacy, that you can leave things behind that are there. So part of the bid, you work with the International Olympic Committee and the International Sport Federations for Summer Games. These are the international federations that each one will come to your city, and you need to show them and review your plans with them for their approval before you can submit your official bid. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on. One of the strengths we had in New York was a labor support for a no strike pledge if we were successful in winning. And if we go quickly to London, after New York was not selected, I was working with Populous and helping London on their planning, and they've got a fantastic plan that is based just outside the city. So this is currently the downtown. This is Canary Wharf, and the Lee Valley is something that's, when you're asking, what is the right place for an Olympics, London's doing a great job of using it as a way to trigger development or speed up development areas that otherwise could take years or decades to go and reach those milestones. So they have right now, this is the sort of existing conditions of all the infrastructure and transportation routes and paths and rail yards and the existing plan, and then what is proposed. And it's really something that will transform this area and turn it from something that will be a great event for the Olympics, and then afterwards you can see that this is a very old plan, so this is significantly changed, but this is a little peek at what it was in 2005, 2006, and then you can see where future growth and planned growth is set up in the city. So this is something that, again, these are very old, but some interesting images, and during Olympic Games and what it looks like after Games. So that some of the venues go away, some stay, some are reduced in size. The Olympic Stadium there is going to reduce from 60, 70,000 people down to 15 or 20,000. And so that's something that's manageable for this area. They don't need a venue that big, but it's something that they've been very good about the legacy. So this is another view of the park during the Olympics and then in the post-Olympics. Same thing here. It's a very industrial area of the city that's heavily polluted, and this is allowing them to transform that in a very, very accelerated schedule. And then you can just begin to see some of the planning and elements that go into planning a game. So you have what the Olympic overlay is, what the legacy is, threading utilities through it, the residual space during the games, sort of just different plans that show the public character of the park. Yeah.
I mentioned this costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Where does, I guess, the 100% breakdown of those funds come from?
I mean, this is largely dependent on the city that's bidding and what their long-term city planning is and how they integrate with that. But it's money, I'll get to a little bit of it, but the IOC contributes money, and there's money primarily through the TV rights and through ticketing. And then the rest is there's marketing and advertising and other things associated that the cities can use for revenue. Sometimes the governments will contribute significant amounts. In New York, we were largely charged as a private group to be able to finance our operation based on the revenue that we could get. One of the challenges for an American bid is that in the bid process, you're required to have government backing, that if there are cost overruns, that the government will cover those. And when you have London and there's a Ministry of Sport or Department of Sport, that it's something that the United States doesn't have, and the United States just doesn't have that in place. It wasn't something where it would be perceived that we would have problems with it, but it was something that was just different in the United States than in other parts of the world. Does that answer? These are, the plans that they've done there in terms of the kind of regeneration and sustainability, the parks that are there, how they're planted, why they're planted, how they're are able to offset existing pollution and things like bioswales and other planting that makes something a long-term plan that go way beyond sport venues and what the athlete experience. Here's a little peek at the basketball venue. This was in the planning stages, and you can see most people just see the front of a facility, which is if you go to any sporting arena, you go through the front door, you might see people selling hot dogs out front and things, and then you go in, you leave and come back out, but there's a whole world of support behind a venue that's significantly larger during an Olympics than there is during a typical sporting event. So if you go to Madison Square Garden to see the circus, or if you go to see the Knicks, they have enough space to have hot dogs for one game and beer for one game and all that, and then there's places for the TV trucks to park and all that. But in an Olympics, you'll have 4 games in one day, and you need 4 times as many hot dogs and 4 times as much beer. And so the challenges for that are really significant. If you peer behind the screen or the curtain, there's quite a large world of logistics and support. So the environment is something that's very important. It was important in the New York bid. It's important in what London was doing, talking about what you're going to do and how you're going to have a minimal footprint. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So just things that, one of the things we were doing in New York was trying to get across the perception or the misperception that New York City is a big city that's all pavement and there's no grass or trees. And to get around that, to talk about things that, transforming a landfill, one of the largest in the world at one time, into a park. This is happening. It's actually happened now. Again, this is the actual in the Great Gatsby. The mention the giant ash heap is actually one of the sites that is this site in the Willow and Meadow Lakes in Queens, and it was going to transform into something where you can see bioswales and new plantings that would help clean the water and the runoff from the surrounding highways. The waterfront of Brooklyn, and to transform that. These are things that London is doing, that New York was proposing, we'll try another video later. We jump to finance. I forget, somebody had a question on this, but we were looking at, here's our revenues, here's our expenditures, and that we were going to be sort of self-contained. We weren't getting overruns. If things went over by the government, was not going to come bail out. And then just going out to give some context, Salt Lake City was very successful in terms of advertising and ticket sales, and their market rank in the United States, the sponsors they were getting and their revenue based on our projections was something that helped to alleviate fears in that area. And then just the 52 million people within like a 3.5-hour drive or train ride to New York City would bode well for ticket sales. So just some of the numbers in terms of analysis and what we were doing. In terms of transport, I'll go through this very quickly, but it's a critical element. This is the kind of thing where, again, if you do it right, then it can largely go unnoticed. And if it's not done right, then that's when people get upset and athletes don't get to where they need to go on time. And the people that are there to write articles about the event get upset and write things that are not focused on the event. So New York City has got a very robust transport network, and that was something that, again, we were trying to have all of the facilities. They were all located so you could reach them on mass transit. There's Olympic lanes. This is an image from one of the athlete buses I was on in Athens that you could see under penalty of people being arrested. Nobody drove in these lanes, and it kind of worked in Athens. And then just the different groups. So we had athletes and media. They're taken on buses. You have, the athletes, the media are in range of facilities. The Olympic family is another group that you need to resolve. Sponsors are a big group that, again, are a separate, we call flow. And then the spectators coming on mass transit. So that was one of the plans. The subway, people were wondering, how can you reach capacity? And there's a very large dip in August. I don't know if anybody wants to guess why there's a large dip in capacity on the New York City subway system, largely in end of July and August, which would account for the exact amount of people that would be expected at the games. But there are approximately 1.5 million people that are on summer vacation that wouldn't be on the subway that would allow us to have the capacity in New York. 3 major airports, and then just the system. We were very concerned that we wanted to present the ability to get people where they needed to go and get around the perception that New York City is just Manhattan, where it takes a long time to get from the east side to the west side. So facts about buses, the number of routes, the capacity, all of these things were very important. Intercity rail, again, 50 million people within a 3.5-hour ride. And then what we had to do was to sort of plan for the worst day, which turned out to be day 10. Part of the bid is you plan when all the venues are, where the venues are, when the competition is going to be, so you'll know which days there's a gold medal in this sport and which days they have off days. But day 10 on the Olympics was the worst, so we were able to count there would be 335 buses for athletes and officials, 670 spectator shuttle buses, ferries for 50,000 people. All of this was making sure that we hadn't left anything unplanned. And then security, it's an enormous event. NYPD, Secret Service, and it's a national security event. So like the Super Bowl is considered that as well, where they shut down the airspace, and it's become something that the federal government gets involved with as well. NYPD is actually bigger than the next 4 metropolitan police departments in the country. So I think this is that showing, if you add up Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Houston, they're still not as big as NYPD. The experience that the city has with the United Nations General Assembly, the marathon, there was the Republican convention during the middle of our bid to show that New York could bid things. So then in the end, it's really why New York? And this goes to your question. How do you get people excited? What are the things that, New York, one of the big things that we said was it's the world's second home, that everybody's family, somebody came through New York City. If you go to New York City, you can get food from anywhere in the world. They speak your language. The excitement, we're talking about what we would leave behind so that there's a mark more than just a stadium, that facilities, that the city, that the youth that are preparing for games are all considered the environment. And then again, just to sort of summarized everything, but every country we get a home field advantage. The bid actually started by the deputy mayor at the time, before he became deputy mayor, Dan Doctoroff, who's now the president of Bloomberg, and he was at the World Cup when it was in New York, and he was watching like Bulgaria versus Chile or something, one of the games, and it was at the Meadowlands, and it was completely sold out. And he thought that, if you can sell out these two countries, and everybody is from the cities coming there, then why has New York not had the Olympics? And unfortunately, we didn't get it, but it was a very compelling story. But so was Paris's story, and London's, and Moscow's. And I want to thank you guys for having me here today. It's hard to bite off planning Olympics in 50 minutes, but maybe that's a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes. It's one of the most exciting jobs I've ever had. Was absurd, crazy hours working around the clock for 2 years on an international bid, and it was just exhilarating to go from places where I was in Singapore for the final vote, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder, and I was there as the senior architect explaining our plans to people, and somebody said, well, this gentleman wants to talk to you about the Olympic Stadium, and it was Henry Kissinger. And he had all these questions about things, and we had brought Muhammad Ali, and he was there as an ambassador, and so it was sort of a surreal kind of 2 years that things like this just seem to happen more than they should. But it was a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys will get to experience something similar to that in the future. But thank you very much.